The making of Please Please Me. Before starting, I recommend you to watch the latest video about the making of All My Loving. The song. In 1980, John recognized the full fatherhood of Please Please Me. He was looking to write a song that was in the style of Only the Lonely by Roy Orbison, which had been #1 in Great Britain in October 1960. Another source of inspiration was the song Please by Bing Crosby, which his mother Julia sang to him when he was a boy. The phrase, "Please lend your little ears to my please," caught his attention. I've always been intrigued by the double meaning of the word please. So it was a combination of Bing Crosby and Roy Orbison, said John, who also remembered writing the song in his room on Menlove Avenue at his Aunt Mimi's Liverpool home. Another influence was the 1960 Everly Brothers song, Kathy's Clown, which is where the origin of Paul's sustained voice in the verses lies, while John performs the tune. Paul said, "It was me who had the idea to hold that high note while the melody descended." Realization. The song that gives the album its name was recorded several months earlier, on Monday, November 26, 1962, for the group's second single. On Tuesday, September 11, the band was in the studio to re-record Love Me Do. 2 hours had been enough to finish it, so they still had an hour of studio at their disposal. Ron Richards, who was chairing the session during George Martin's momentary absence, asked them if they had a new song they wanted to record. According to Jeff Emmerich, the four nodded at once and suggested, "Please Please Me." George Martin heard the song, but found it too monotonous. He said, "It was a Roy Orbison-style song, very slowly, with some blue voices. It was obvious to me that they needed to step on the accelerator, so he advised them to play it faster and to harmonize John's voice with the backing vocals. Then he invited them to try again in a future session." Martin said to Ron Richards, "We haven't managed to make Please Please Me sound right, but the song is too good to discard. We will save it for next time." On Monday, November 26, before recording it, they rehearsed it, considerably retouched, for 1 hour. George Martin was impressed, and at 1900 hours it was finished. They needed 18 takes including overlays with John's harmonica. Martin said, "Everything happened in a wonderful way. The entire session was conducted with total joy. At the end, I hit the intercom button and said, 'Gentlemen, you just recorded your first #1. John, equally enthusiastic, said, "We had slightly modified the tempo, we had changed the lyrics a bit, and we had the idea of adding the harmonica, just like in Love Me Do." On the day of the session, we were so happy that the recording wasn't going fast enough for us. On November 30, Martin and Smith performed, in the absence of the Beatles, a mix in mono and another in stereo. Please Please Me with Ask Me Why, on the B-side, was their second single in Great Britain, released on January 11, 1963, and the first in the United States, released 2 weeks later, on February 25. In their country, reaches the #2 in the record retailer list and #1 in the rest of the lists. While in the United States, after its second release in 1964, it would reach #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. After the British launch, Dick James, the new editor of the group, provides them on January 19 with their first major television appearance on Thank Your Lucky Stars, a program with a high audience among British teenagers. They recorded their intervention on January 13 and only interpreted the song Please Please Me. For most of the viewers it was a revelation. The Beatlemania had just been born. The album. Given the success of the first 2 singles, Martin decides to chain the release of an album as soon as possible. At first, he plans to record it at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, where the Beatles perform regularly, in order to capture their stage strength. But immediately he realizes that the technical conditions of the club are insufficient, and he reflects on other ways of finding the sound of the live show. It is Norman Smith who provides the solution. Smith, in order to reconstruct in the studio the environment that characterizes the group, he does not try to isolate each of the instruments as much as possible, but, on the contrary, he makes sure that each microphone captures a bit of the general atmosphere. This way of doing things makes it possible to reconstruct a sound as similar as possible to live sound and is totally contrary to the practices of the time. February 11, 1963. From 10 a.m. to 10:45 p.m., The Beatles performed the incredible feat of recording 11 songs in just over 12 hours. However, when they entered Studio 2 on Abbey Road that Monday morning, they were not in the best of ways. Fatigued by the innumerable concerts that they have given in the last months, they were in bad shape, especially John, who had his throat touched. Norman Smith remembered the huge jug of juice on the piano and the quantity of pills he took for his throat, the famous Zoobs, accompanied, paradoxically, by cigarettes from the Peter Stuyvesant's big cardboard that they didn't stop smoking. By 10:45 p.m., the 11 songs were recorded. There was only one track that they didn't end, Hold Me Tight, which would appear later on with the Beatles, the second album. 8 were the original songs signed by McCartney-Lennon. The Lennon-McCartney credit would not appear until the fourth single, She Loves You, with I'll Get You on B-side, which was released on August 23, 1963. The total cost of the album was £400. For this workday, the Beatles earned £14 each as studio musicians. Please Please Me is released in Great Britain on March 22, 1963. Since May 11, the album is placed at the top of the British charts, where it will remain 30 weeks, the absolute record of the entire 1960s, and will be displaced from first place on December 1 by the second album of the group, with the Beatles. In the United States, Brian Epstein had only managed to sign with VJ, a fairly modest blues company. Capitol did not believe in their success yet. The album was released under the name Introducing the Beatles on July 22, 1963, but not commercialized, and reissued on January 27, 1964, both times with a slightly different playlist than the British version. The album was about to be called Off the Beatles Track, an idea of George Martin. For the cover, he hired Angus MacBean, a photographer with whom he regularly collaborated and who took the photo in which the Beatles are posing in the stairwell of the Amy's headquarters in Manchester Square, today a demolished building. MacBean took up the same idea for the Get Back project in 1969. The photo, which was not used at the time, later served for the Blue Album in 1973. The instruments. John uses a 1958 Rickenbacker 325 Capri, which will always be one of his favorites. He falls in love with the guitar at first sight in Hamburg and buys it for around £100 in the fall of 1960. For 1963 he painted it black, and the guitar last appeared in Lennon's hands in 1964 during a performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. But John did not stop using it until the end of his days, as the guitar appeared in the sessions of the 1980 album, Double Fantasy. Today it belongs to Sean, his second son. Another guitar that both John and George use is the Gibson J160E, which they bought in 1962 at Rushworth, Liverpool, and used it until the group's latest recordings. Both John and George used the famous Vox AC30 amplifier. In 1962, Brian Epstein made a deal with the London Jennings Music Store to get the same amps as the Shadows. He promised that the group, which, according to him, would be bigger than Elvis, would never use a brand other than Vox in concert. Reg Clark, manager of the store, was convinced. Later he said, referring to Brian, he kept his word. Paul uses a Hofner 501 bass that he bought in 1961 at the Steinway House in Hamburg for £30. The advantage for Paul, who is left-handed, is that he has a symmetrical instrument that does not bother him when he holds it the opposite way. The amplifier is a Leek TL12+, connected to 2 speakers and a Tannoy dual concentric system. George plays a 1957 Gretsch Duo Jet, purchased in 1961, thanks to a Liverpool Echo ad, for £75. This guitar will accompany him to Hamburg, the Cavern Club, on a tour of Europe, and he will also use it occasionally in recordings. Finally, Ringo uses a Premier mahogany Duraplastic drum kit that he had purchased in July 1962, just before joining the Beatles. Technical data. On February 25, George Martin and Norman Smith mixed the album and perform a mono and a stereo version of each track. However, for Please Please Me, they only have a mono mix dated November 30. Since they don't have the original tapes, they put together different shots from November 26 to get a new stereo mix. The difference with the mono version is at the end of the song, when John chuckles at minute 1.33 on the first "Come On" after an error in the lyrics of the previous sentence. Extra data. Norman Smith recalls that he sent a package anonymously and discreetly, containing the Please Please Me album, to Decca's artistic director, Dick Rowe. The Decca, then a major rival of Amy's, had decided to reject the Beatles a few months earlier. Smith expected Rowe to believe he would receive the demo from a band expecting a contract and reject them a second time. There was no reply. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I invite you to subscribe, activate the bell and leave a like. There is more to come.